There you go.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Welcome. I hope you had a wonderful week and everybody's well. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it. I love having the opportunity to learn Torah with all of you. And let me start by wishing everybody Lag BaOmer Sameach. But I'm going to start with something about Lag BaOmer. We mentioned a minute ago that we're getting close to the end of it, of course. It ends with sunset. But let me start with that. So we begin this piece while it's still um, like Wilmer for us. I'm going to share an idea that I had the opportunity to share on Shabbat. So, Harold, this may be a repetition for you. I'm hoping that's okay. And I'm not sure who else is with us this evening that would have been in Shul on Shabbat. But I think this is a really an intriguing idea, and I want to share it with you. And it's about Lag BaOmer. So, again, the word Lug Bomer is not really a word. Lug is essentially two letters in the alphabet, a lamed and a gimel, and the numerical equivalent is 33. It's the 33rd day in the Omer. And why is that significant? There's two primary reasons which our tradition tells us that Lag BaOmer is significance. It's not exactly a holiday, but it's definitely a day that assumes some extra dimension of celebration. So the first answer, which is often quoted, comes from the Gemara, where the Gemara says that during his lifetime, Rabbi Akiva, of course, was a prolific teacher of Torah throughout the land of Israel. And one year, during a 33-day period of time, this is following the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, 33 days it took for 12,000 pairs of Rabbi Akiva's students to die mysteriously. So 24,000 students died in an unexplained manner, meaning unexpectedly, I should say that, unexpectedly, and their death took 33 days. After 33 days, they stopped dying. Now, one reason could be, you know why they stopped dying? Because there's none left. That all 24,000 students were dead, and therefore the death that is over. What happened? Like, why did these students of Rabbi Akiva, why were they punished? Obviously, this was heaven sent. So the Gemara offers an answer. This is the Gemara's answer. Lo nahagu kavod zeh that these 24,000 students did not properly respect each other. So that's a tragedy. And so for the 33 days that they died, centuries after this happened, the rabbinic leadership at that time decided to mourn their sudden and unexpected death by instituting mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, mourning Avelis practices. And that's why from the second day of Pesach, so not Lag BaOmer, for those who follow that custom, men don't shave, we don't get haircuts, there are no weddings. All of these things are things that invoke feelings of happiness and celebration. And so that's also why during this period of time, people stop listening to sort of joyful music, instrumental music. So that's answer number one. So after the 33rd day, the day that they stop dying, a cause of celebration. Come back then 1 second. The other reason, which is quoted uh, a lot, is that it was on this day in the Jewish calendar that one of Rabbi Akiva's greatest students, maybe his greatest students, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he died. He died on Lag BaOmer. And according to the Zohar, the book of mysticism and Kabbalah, which he is attributed to be the author of, he wrote it. It was before he died on that day that he gathered his own students and he taught them the mysteries of the world. He taught them understandings and secrets that he had gathered through the course of his life and learning. Don't forget, he and his son had secluded themselves for years in a cave in order to escape the wrath of the Romans. So he and his son had the opportunity, just the two of them, to explore and to contemplate and to learn and to reveal things about God and the universe that others hadn't. And so before he
Listen.
shared this information with his Talmud. So let's just take a pause and double click on what I just told you. The death of Rabbi Akiva's students, and I mean, well, they stopped dying, and the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So if we just think about that for a second, why would we celebrate at the end of the period that they died? Wouldn't it be more appropriate, if you think about it, to invoke a Kaddish day, a mourning day, something that was more appropriate as a memorial rather than a celebratory response? So to establish, oh, they all finished dying, thank God, let's dance, let's sing. Sounds like it's not exactly the most appropriate response to that. And what is it that they got wrong? I mean, after all, Rabbi Akiva's students were, and I know this sounds obvious, they were the students of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva made famous that in his mind, one of the great principles of the entire Torah is v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor like yourself. And likely this was the pasuk over the Aron Kodesh in his Beit Midrash, if there was such a thing. So how did 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, like, didn't they get it? Did they not understand what the Rebbe was about? Ad kedei kach, that was the level of dissonance and disconnect that existed between the great Rabbi Akiva and his students. Like he never gave shiurim on v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. That's one set of questions. Let's go now to the other side. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, as I said, this was the day in which he died. So if you take a look at the books of halacha that deal with aspects, halachot and minhagim connected to mourning, you find often that they're more associated. It's more appropriate for fasting, for learning, for introspection on a day of mourning. And so on the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died, celebration seems to be the wrong thing. And here's another question. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai dies, and for whatever reason, which we have not yet gotten to, huge celebration, amazing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he must have given over so much to the world. He gave to his students the secrets that he learned. Didn't Moshe Rabbeinu do something similar? Well, Moshe Rabbeinu died during the month of Adar, the 7th day of Adar. We have nothing remotely similar on Moshe Rabbeinu's yahrzeit. Some people fast. Maybe don't say Tachanun for those who don't, and many do. Like, why for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Yes. And for Moshe Rabbeinu, nothing. Zip. Nada. Why? It doesn't make sense. Is Moshe Rabbeinu not at least as important as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? So we have a few things to take a look at. What is it that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's students missed? Why is it that there is no marking of Moshe Rabbeinu's yahrzeit the same way as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's yahrzeit? And if it is his yahrzeit, why is it celebratory as opposed to more contemplative, reflective, and full of mourning? Okay, so I'm going to try and put these pieces together to see if we can understand. So let's start with the first thing we mentioned. What happened that the students of Rabbi Akiva missed this? So the v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor like yourself. Obviously, the key word in the pasuk is v'ahavta. You should love. So what is love? I know it's a difficult question to answer. Etymologically, many people explain that the word ahava, spelled aleph hey vet hey, actually comes from the word hav in Aramaic, means to give. That an act of love is an act of giving. Well, I think all of us would understand that. Just think of all the people in our lives that we love and think about the way in which we demonstrate our love. And it's often something to give. Give a hug, give a gift, give time. That's how one of the ways, maybe most of the fundamental way that we show love. But listen to what the Gemara says when it explained the reason for the death of Rabbi Akiva's students. It didn't say that they didn't love each other. It didn't say that. It said lo nahagu kavod ze leze. It said they didn't show respect. So it sounds like the Gemara is making a distinction. It's making a distinction between v'ahavta l'recha kamocha and the notion of kavod, ahava and kavod. So it's possible that the Rebbe gave the shiur. Rabbi Akiva talked about love, and they got it. But something that about their love didn't work or didn't match kavod. So what's kavod? Respect. What would be the difference between ahava, love, and respect? So here's what I think is a possibility. As I said a second ago, ahava invokes the notion of giving. So when you love somebody, what do you give them? So ostensibly, you give them things that are important, but important to whom? If I love somebody, the thing that I want to give to the person is not what's important to me necessarily, but what's important to them. In order for me to demonstrate love, I want to know what you cherish, and I want to make sure that what I give you is that which you cherish, not that which I cherish, because you may not. So if my love to you is a way of imposing my value system, my perspective, the things that I like and I love and I hold dear, and I'm giving them to you because I think that you should also love them and embrace them and hold them dear and cherish them, that may not be the type of love that Rabbi Akiva is speaking about. The type of love that Rabbi Akiva is speaking about, and this is where the students missed it, is not the love that you give when you demonstrate what's important to you. It's the love that you give when you understand what's important to them. What's kavod? Kavod is respect. So what's respect? Respect is when you realize that the person that you're having this relationship is different than you. You know, there's an interesting etymological connection between, well, I've been mute everybody, so I'm just going to do that now. Give me 1 second. I think there's an interesting etymological connection between the word respect, kavod, and between another word, exactly the same letters, kaf, veit, dal, called kaved. I'm sure all of you, many of you know what the word kaved means. Kaved means heavy. So what would be the connection between the word kavod, the conceptual connection, kavod, respect, and heavy? Well, you could say that the person that I'm showing respect to is a weighty person, obviously not a description of mass, but of stature. Or, and this is what I'm thinking about, is that kaved, something heavy, doesn't move so much. It's more inert. In other words, one of the ways in which I show respect is not by imposing on you, is I stay where I am and give you the opportunity to fill the space that you need. When I love you, it's not my giving you what I want. It's letting you take that which you need in your life and finding the space for that. That's the idea of love. I retreat. It's an act of contraction, as it were, allowing you to do what you need, to experience what you need, which may not be the same as me. Love doesn't mean sameness. You have to take what I want. Love may mean I'm realizing that what I am and what I have may be different, but I have this feeling towards you that I want you to experience that which fills you up. We all know people, I think, when they walk into a room, they fill the room. They don't give people a space. That's not love. So the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, when they heard the Shiur of Haflarecha Kamocha, what are they doing? They're sitting and they're sitting at each other with each other and learning, but they're not allowing their study partner to sort of express that feeling. He says, no, I'm right and you're wrong, and listen to what I have to say. No, you got to listen. It's that when we try to talk to people, not with them, but at them. And kavod is when you give the person what they need and not what you need. You stay, as it were, in your place and you allow them to feel the space that they need. That's something that Rabbi Akiva did not do. Now, here's something fascinating. I don't know whether or not all of us read the small print in the Sidurim when it comes to Sfirat HaOmer. But beginning from the first night of Sfirat HaOmer all the way to the last night of Sfirat HaOmer, if you take a look at the Sidur, I guess, it's in most Sidurs. I know it's in our school and others. I can't speak for every Sidur. If you take a look at each day of Sfirat HaOmer, you'll notice in small letters, they talk about different words. So I want to tell you what these words are. They're called sfirot. So in the world of Kabbalah, in the world of mysticism, Hashem creates the world through emanations from himself. And in emanating these qualities of Hashem into the world, what he's essentially doing, he's inserting into the world these qualities with the expectation that we, as human beings, the creations, somehow work at developing these qualities within ourselves. So during the period of time from Pesach to Shavuot, it's 7 weeks. Each week has 7 days. But each week is associated with one of seven sfirot, emanations, qualities, characteristics of the divine. And that week, each of those weeks, are weeks which were intended, apparently, in the world of mysticism and Kabbalah, for us, as we count, to think about how to activate and how to make these qualities of God that he emanated, he inserted into the world, how to make them our qualities. And here are the qualities, 7. So week one, from the second day of Pesach, 7 days, week 1 is the week of Chesed. That's called kindness, meaning loving kindness, benevolence, or love. Yes, that's a quality of God. So week 1, that's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on kindness. Week 2, we're focusing on the quality, the Sephirah, called Gevurah. Gevurah is strength. And strength involves discipline and restraint and power. All of these things are part of the second week. These are qualities of God, and God is expecting us again within the Kabbalistic perspective of the world during the second week of the Sphira week. These are qualities that I should be thinking about. Not only God has, but what would it look like in me? What part about me do I have to develop that is the quality of Gevurah, of discipline or restraint? Number 3, week number 3 is the Sphira of Tiferet, which means beauty. And Tiferet in the world of Kabbalah refers to balance and harmony. Things that are beautiful are considered things which are balanced and harmonious. Things often that have some aspect of compassion. Week 4 is called Netzach, victory. But what does that mean, Netzach? Something that Netzach comes from victory. It also comes from the word eternity. Lansiach means to make something eternal and perpetual. So Netzach, that week, I talked about the idea of endurance and persistence or ambition. Think about these qualities. These are qualities, again, according to the mystical view, the Kabbalistic view of the creation of the world, that God inserts into the world, but he expects us to do that. These are amazing qualities. Think about what sort of human beings we would become, what Jews we would become, if these qualities were things we actively and deliberately, intentionally tried to develop. Hod is the next week, is splendor. What does that mean, Hod? These are qualities of humility, because from the Hebrew, Hod means beauty, but the same root, the same word, the same letters of Hod, beauty, are also part of Lehitvadot, to confess. Confession is an act of humility as well. And Hod is also the shorish of the word lehodot, to thank. So this is the week where we develop our qualities of gratitude, our qualities of humility. The next two, so now we're getting to the 6th week of the Sphira period from Pesach to Shavuot, is Yesod, which means foundation, which is connection, communication. And the very last week of Sfirat Omer is Malchut, which means kingship. And that's about sovereignty, embodiment, or the presence in the physical world. So I have now 7 specific qualities over 7 weeks. And in fact, Kabbalah goes one step further during the period of Sfirat Omer. So I have 7 weeks, I have 7 qualities. And each day of the 7 weeks is given a quality. So, for example, the first week was Chesed. So the first day of the first week is Chesed and Chesed together. But the second day of the first week, well, it's the week of Chesed, but the second day has the second quality. So it's Gvurah in Chesed, and then it's Tiferet in Chesed. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because to understand Sfirat Omer in a Kabbalistic way, which I think offers really deep insight, is to understand that we are now in the midst of the week of 5. So the first Midah, the first Sfira was Chesed, week 1. Week 2 is Gvurah. Week 3 is Tiferet. Week 4 is Netzach. And week 5, which we're in, is Hod. Hod, what is Hod? Humility and gratitude. Okay, stop for a second. When did week 5 start? Remember, we're not talking about weeks like we think Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We're talking about from the second day of Pesach, we count 7. That's 1 week. The next day is the next week. So week 5, do you know when it began? It began on Friday. Okay. What was the calendar date in Hebrew for Friday? The calendar date in Hebrew for Friday was Pesach Sheni, the 14th day of Iyar. What does that mean? Well, the Torah tells us in Sefer Bamidbar that on the second year that the Jewish people left Egypt, Hashem warned everybody, okay, we're getting close to the Pesach time. I want everybody to get ready. Remember all the laws we talked about, Pesach, Pesach, Pesach. Great. And then Hashem gave everybody a warning, we're getting close to Pesach, get ready to celebrate. A group of people came over to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, Moshe, we're not going to be able to celebrate Pesach because we are impure. And there's no chance for us to become pure by the time we need to bring the Korban Pesach, which means essentially that we won't be able to participate with the rest of the Jewish nation in the experience of Pesach, and we don't think that's right. What can we do? So Moshe takes this to Hashem. This is in the Torah, and Hashem says, "Okay, you know what? They're right. I'm going to create something new. What's that called? Pesach Sheni. Okay, Pesach Sheni. Now, just unpack that for a minute. Just unpack that whole story, which is a remarkable story. Why is it remarkable? God is the omniscient one. He knows everything. He creates the universe and he creates Pesach. And this is it. That's the rule. God's rule is rule. And so he said, Pesach is for everybody. You got to follow these laws. Along comes a small group of people and says, we can't do this. What are we going to do? And God says, you're right. And so it's as though God does what? He takes a step back. It's God's humility. He contracts himself and says, I fill the world. I know everything. And I know what's going on. But your point is well taken. And I'm prepared to take a step back and allow you to have something called Pesach Sheni, which I'm going to create because of what you said. Think about the humility necessary to say, you're right. And it's not coming from just a person. It's coming from God's lips, as it were. And when you hear Hashem say, I'm prepared to take a step back, that's the message of Hod. And that was the first day of the 5th week, the first day. But you know what's also during the week of Hod? You know what also happens during the week of Hod? Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer falls during the week of Hod, the week of humility, the week of gratitude. And what happens on Lag BaOmer? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Yortzeit. So let's unpack that a little bit and figure out why is that? What's the Hod message of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Yortzeit? What's the Hod message? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai spent years and years and years of his life acquiring and understanding, unpacking the mysteries, unpacking the Kabbalistic understanding of God that nobody had yet discovered. He discovered it. It's his discovery. It belonged to him. It's his greatness. It's his chelik and olam haba. Look what he accomplished. And before he dies, he says to all his Haminim, listen, I need to share this with you. I don't want to keep this just for myself. That's not humility. That's ego. No, I'm so grateful for what I had the opportunity to learn and to understand. I want to share it with you before I go. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai shares it, and on the day that he shares it and completes teaching it to his students, he passes away. And our celebration is not because, yay, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is dead. No, it's because we understand the selfless act that he did. It was an act of Hod. And here's the thing. Remember I told you each week has one of the Sfirot, and each of the 7 days of the week has its own? Guess what? Lag BaOmer is in the week of Hod, and the quality on the week of Hod that he died on is Hod. So it's the Hod quality. It's the 5th day of the 5th week. So it's Hod and Hod together. And the whole week starts with Hod. So what does that mean? Sfirat Omer assumes a specific type of message. And what's the message? The message is this. Rabbi Akiva historically was known for what? I mean, we know the stories of his life, but his greatest contribution was his contribution for Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's what he did at a time when the Romans forbade the transmission of Torah. Rabbi Akiva said, I refuse that. And he gave his life to make sure that Torah Sheba'al Peh would not diminish or become extinct. And his greatest student was Shimon Bar Yochai. And so Lag BaOmer is a day in which we revel, we celebrate the dynamic nature of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And here now, I think we can understand why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, his passing is celebrated and not Moshe Rabbeinu's. What do you associate most of all with Moshe Rabbeinu? Rabbi Akiva we associate with Torah Sheba'al Peh, which, by the way, after the Roman destruction of the base of Mikdash, Rabbi Akiva started up again. He had 5 students. He went to the south of Israel and he began teaching Torah again. And he created the vibrancy of Torah Sheba'al Peh that they hadn't seen before. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the continuation of that. But what did Moshe bring to the Jewish people? He gave them the Shnei Luchot HaBrit in the Torah. That's Gezerat HaKatuv. Here are the psukim. Read the pasuk, and the pasuk doesn't change. We don't change a letter. We don't change a word. We don't change a pasuk. The Torah itself, the Chumash, is never changing. That's not the same as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Akiva. Moshe Rabbeinu represents the specific, unchanging nature of the Torah, which we need. Of course we need it. But it's a different experience for us. And it's not as dynamic, and it's not as exciting in some ways. And so Moshe Rabbeinu's Petira, his passing, we observe it's on the calendar clearly, but it's never seen as being appropriate to celebrate his passing as it is to celebrate Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who on the day of his death unleashed to his students all of the mysteries that he himself had learned through his hard work. Moshe Rabbeinu also taught, not in the same way. And so when we talk about Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day, or as we said, the 5th day of the 5th week, which is Hod of Hod, the idea of humility and gratitude, it gives a whole new spin on this day called Lag BaOmer. It's not just about shooting arrows and roasting marshmallows or singing songs or dancing and singing. That's part of it. But at the core of all of that is this notion that really it's about understanding our impact, our understanding how humility and gratitude play such a role, not only in our own personal lives, but in the lives of our nation. And it's a reminder that the days between Pesach and Shavuot are not just 49 days. Okay, we got to keep going and we're going to have Shavuos. According to this mystical Kabbalistic perspective, these are days for us to concentrate and contemplate the idea of self-refinement. Now, self-refinement isn't really just relegated to 50 days and that's it. You have 50 days to work on this, and after that, the 53rd day, the 57th day, the 80th day, you don't have to. Of course not. But that's one of the natures of the symbolic natures of Jewish thought and Jewish life. We try to associate certain really meaningful ideas with times of the calendar. So they always come back. It's cyclical. We will always come back to Sfirat HaOmer, one year after the other, because we always need to be reminded that yes, we can refine ourselves, and that loving kindness, chesed, is a quality that God gave to the world, and we try to emulate it. Gvura, judgment and discipline, harmony and balance, endurance and persistence, humility and gratitude, connection, communication, all of these sfirot were sfirot emanations, revelations that God shared with the rest of us. And that, my friends, is a Kabbalistic perspective on why Sfirat HaOmer matters, and specifically why Lag BaOmer became associated with a day of celebration, not just meaningless celebration for the sake of having music and dancing, but hopefully a way for us to celebrate the opportunity to be grateful and humble. Okay. I started with that, as I said, because Lag BaOmer is almost over, and I wanted to help Orion, as they say. I wanted to get involved, do it. So today we're going to be learning a little bit from two parashot of the Torah, Behar and Bechukotai, which means this Shabbat, in Yitzhak Hashem, Haba Aleinu L'Tova, we will conclude the third of the five Chumashim. And so we should be celebrating that for sure. It's a seal. And we should drink a l'chaim. We should drink a l'chaim in shul, wherever we are, to say, thank God Hashem gave us the opportunity to live through another cycle of Sefer Vayikra. Yirtzeh Hashem will give us the endurance for Sefer B'Midbar and Sefer Devarim till we get to Simchas Torah. But let's begin. Excuse me. One of the main things of the first of the two parsha, Behar and Bechukotai, is the notion of the mitzvah of Shemitah and Yovel. So don't forget that the Torah is describing the reality of an agricultural agrarian community, but these are not just rules that apply to them. And since Israel is not just an agricultural country, it's very industrial, but still these apply today as well. These rules apply. What rules? Shemitah. So Shemitah, as you know, is a biblical rule that says to the Jewish farmer, you may farm for 6 years, do everything you need. You reap and sow and plant and water and harvest and prune, all of that. When it comes to the beginning of the 7th year, you can't do any of that. You can't do any, you have to leave the land, just leave it alone. But what about all the things that naturally grow on their own, like fruit trees are going to bear fruit, and maybe some things will grow from the ground on their own? So the Torah says you can't cut any of it down. You have to leave it for the other people, poor people, to come into your field, and they will have the right to go to your fruit trees in your orchard and take what they need. You have a right also to eat, but you can't cut down and sell. There's no commerce from what you grow. I don't want to actually get into how the modern state of Israel bypasses this, because in a modern state with so many citizens, how can you not farm the land and still feed everybody without having imposed starvation? Great question, but not for right now. Yovel, also mentioned, teaches us that in addition to having a 7-year cycle, with the 7th year being called Shnat Shemitah, like a week, the 7th day is Shabbos, the 7th year is called Shemitah, there's a cycle of 7 years. And the 50th year is called Yovel, which is the Jubilee year. And in that year, the Yovel, something else happens. Not just the land is affected, but the social status of people in the country. So in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, there was this notion that sometimes people ended up either being sold into slavery by their by the Beit Din, or they chose to sell themselves into slavery, at which point the slaves were to be let go. They were to be let go. Nobody could be a slave then in the 50th. They had to be let go. Yeah, but I bought the slave. It was a rule. On the 50th year, anybody who the Beit Din sold into slavery as a way of paying back a theft, or a person who said, I can't support myself. I'd rather be somebody's slave and servant than be on my own. Everybody's set free. That's part one. Part two of Yovel is that if I've run into financial hardship, and so I needed to sell my property for the money. So this is the land that I got from my father, from my Zaidi, all the way back to Yehoshua. This is the land that God gave to our family, this Shevet. Unfortunately, I can't keep it. The Torah says when it comes to the 50th year, the original owner of the land should get his land back. So the land is not to be worked, and the land gets returned to the owner, as well as slaves get sent free. So maybe one of the things that we can uncover when we think about the messaging behind these, in addition to what the actual halachot are, one of the messages, especially during Shemitah and Yovel, there really are no wealthy and poor people. Those class distinctions get put away, because nobody is a landowner anymore. And if in Shemitah you own many acres of land, I'm going to sell so much produce on this year, you become wealthy. No, actually you can't. not on the seventh year. The same rules that apply to the poor person apply to you. So there's almost like this forced, what's the word? Forced equality, I guess, onto everybody. There's no wealthy, there's no poor, and there are no masters, and there are no servants. And it reminds us that essentially we all occupy the same sort of place on the social economic ladder of the community. And all of us, in some ways, are servants, but not to each other. We're servants to Hashem, because Hashem rules the world and Hashem owns the land. It's all His. And what we think makes us owners, maybe that's a bit of a misnomer. I buy the land and I treat the land, I pay taxes, I get that. But ultimately, God created the world, and He is the one that decides about the way in which the world needs to be conducted. And so He's told us in His Holy Torah that this is the way we have to do it. Commercial activity and competition, which are so strong forces in other years, well, they're gone during Shemitah and Yovel. Um, and that reminds us again that while it seems at other times that there are big gaps between people in social and economic strata, we're all equally subservient to Hashem. And so, what again, it's a reminder that other times, the other 6 years or 49 years, we sometimes compete against each other. It feels that way. Who's got more? Who can buy more? Who can make more? Who can invent more? Who can grab more? And so there's this, sometimes we end up either psychologically or actually economically pitting ourselves against each other and end up serving each other in some ways. But these mitzvot that we're talking about now, they express the theme not of competition. They express the theme of partnership and cooperation that's supposed to accompany us in throughout those years, throughout the Shemitah year in its entirety, and throughout the Yovel year in its entirety. So, it's almost like Hashem says, I want to have a reset button because I know what the forces, the market forces, the social forces that happen. We just let them go unchecked. And sometimes they cause great harm and they cause great upset. And so Hashem says, I created a method by which I think we can hold that in check every 7 years. And that's the Shemitah reset button. And in the 50th year, it's the Yovel button. Okay. I want to take a look at Perek Kafeh. If you're using Chumash, let's open up our Chumashim. This is towards the end of Parsha and Behar, the first of the two. Perek Kafeh, let me just open line for a second. Okay. So towards the end of the Parsha, Hashem sort of reminds us about something. He reminds us about the prohibition of idolatry. And then he issues us the command to show kavod to the mikdash. Let me just find the pasuk for us. Okay. Here, Perek Chavav, last, chapter 26. So let's just read it, chapter 26. I'll read it in English, verse 1. And there's only 2 verses in this Perek in Parsha Behar. You shall not make idols for yourself, and you shall not erect for yourselves a statue or a pillar. And in your land you shall not place a flooring stone upon which to prostrate oneself. I'm Hashem your God. My Shabbat shall you observe, and my sanctuary, umikdashi tirau, you shall revere. I am Hashem. So the first verse talks about avodah zarah, idolatry. The second verse, reminds us that we're supposed to somehow revere Hashem's sanctuary. So it's interesting. Rashi makes an interesting comment on the first pair of these verses and explains that, when a Jew sometimes in the in the historical era that the Torah is speaking about, as we talked about before, sometimes a Jew became poor, so poor that he was not able to sort of pay his bills. He couldn't really afford to carry himself. He didn't have any financial means by which to lead a normal life. So what did he do? He sold himself into slavery. And there were cases of a Jew who was sold into slavery, not to another Jew, but to an idolater, to a pagan. Um, and so what would that Jew who was sold to a goy, to a pagan, to an Oved Avodah Zarah, what might that Jew think to himself as he now begins to live as the servant of an idolater? So if you're in the service of an idolater, that's where you live, that's what you do, that's your responsibilities. And this idolater obviously worships idols. That's why he's called an idolater. And he doesn't keep Shabbos. That's obvious. So then maybe the Jewish servant, the Jewish slave would say to himself, I guess that means that's what I should be doing, because that's what slaves do. Slaves do what their masters ask them. So if my master's an idolater, I should be doing that. If my master isn't keeping Shabbos, then I should not be keeping Shabbos either. But the Torah actively and intentionally dispels this notion. Actually, it's not a notion, it's a misconception, and emphasizes that even while serving an idolater, if you happen to be, chas v'sholom, a Jewish servant, slave, and you're serving an idolater, you must remain faithful to Hashem by avoiding avodah zarah, and you still have the obligation to keep Shabbos. So, but Rashi doesn't explain what this mikdashi tira'u then has to do. I get the juxtaposition, idolatry and Shabbos and slavery, okay. But mikdashi tira'u at the very end, not sure that I understand why that sort of gets put into this chain of ideas. Doesn't seem to be clearly obvious what its link would be to the other things. So Rabbi Ovadia Seforno, in his commentary to the Torah, has a slightly different interpretation, but one that I think offers an interesting insight, not just about that period of history, but as we often said, these are eternal messages that have applicability no matter where you live and when you live. So the Sforno offers a different perspective. And he says that the Torah here proceeds from the subject of the individual servant to the general state of Galus, in exile, when all of the Jewish people are subjugated to foreign rule. Like, if you think about it, once you were kicked out of Israel, then certainly throughout medieval history, the Jews were servants to the master, the feudal lord, or whatever, the monarch. We were just subjugated, no question about it. And so the Torah here, in some ways, anticipates maybe the reaction to the trauma of exile. And the poor people may say, listen, I don't have a brand, I don't have a choice. I got to resort to idolatry and exile. It's a mistaken perception, but maybe we're no longer bound to God. After all, who put us here? Maybe God did. Maybe we don't have to necessarily be mindful of God's rules, because obviously it was in God's plan that I should be here, and I should be working under the feudal lord that's restricting my actions. And maybe you can say, I'm still Jewish, but I can't do all the things that I need to do now under these circumstances. And so I'm going to suspend the type of religious behavior and mitzvah performance while I'm dealing with this condition. And then maybe the people might also neglect not only their own personal responsibilities, but maybe the next step would be to neglect the synagogues, the Beit Knesset, the Beit Midrash, and thinking to themselves that if there is no Beit HaMikdash, then maybe there aren't any places of Mikdash. The central place of Kedusha was the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Well, that's gone. It was destroyed by the Romans, and the Jews were forcibly exiled to countries outside of Israel. Well, with the absence of a Beit HaMikdash, maybe really it's not just the Beit HaMikdash that was destroyed, but all places of holiness now have been eliminated in some way. So maybe in the mind of a exiled nation, these places have also, as it were, been robbed of their centrality to the Jewish life. They've been robbed of their Kedusha. And so, while on the topic of Jews living under the rule of Gentiles, that's why the Torah wants us to understand these reminders. And it sort of insists that we must, excuse me, we have to always turn to Hashem under all circumstances, even difficult ones. And that's the message of Shabbat, the message that we are ultimately the servants of Hashem, and nobody else. And so I wonder whether the Seforno is sort of implying, or maybe we can extract the following idea from Sforno's explanation, goes from individual to the community, and then to the Mikdash as yet another expression or another misconception that have to be corrected. That we have an obligation to be a holy nation, even under very, very difficult circumstances, even in exile, or maybe not even just in exile, maybe even in Israel, where we don't have yet the Beit HaMikdash, and we are under siege, as it were, by nations that seek our destruction. Still, our responsibility to seek Kedusha is not suspended. Sometimes it is tempting in situations like that to just sort of throw your hands up and say, what's the point? It's just nothing matters anymore. And we stop pursuing the things that really make us who we are, and we settle. We settle on a lot of different things. And maybe that's what the Torah is trying to say by putting these three things together, especially in describing difficult circumstances. I'm not sure that we have a modern contemporary situation that's similar to personal servitude, slavery, but I think it's not impossible to imagine a situation where we feel that what makes us Jewish is now being threatened. And truthfully, that is. And now with everybody turning, as it were, feeling or turning against us, what do we do? Is this a sign for us to give up on the things that really have made us who we are when we feel under pressure? Or do we double down and say, no, Kedusha needs to be reinvigorated, because maybe in some ways that's what gives us the ability to endure what we've endured throughout the years and the tragedies and the challenges and all the sadness. It's our stubbornness in not giving up on certain things that make us who we are. Okay, I just want to transition to the second of the two parashot, and I know that time is running out. I want to get to Parshat Bechukotai. So Parshat Bechukotai is the continuation of chapter 26, the end of Parshat Behar. And it just begins this way. This part, I do want to say this in Hebrew first. Im bechukotai telechu, ve'et mitzvotai tishmeru v'asitem otam. If you will follow my decrees and observe my commandments and perform them, then I will provide your rains in their time, and continue. So in other words, begins with Hashem saying, if you do these things that I asked you to do, then here's what I will do for you and reward you. So let's go back to the first words of this parasha. Im bechukotai telechu, which is on the stone translation interpretation, says, if you will follow my decrees and observe my commandments. That's not really the literal translation. It's the intent, but it's not the literal translation. The literal translation of Im bechukotai telechu means, if you walk with my statutes. Chukotai are my statutes. Telechu from the word lalecha, to walk. Now, why is that interesting? It's interesting because if you think about Hebrew, and certainly Hashem is the master of Hebrew, having created the language himself, that's really not the right word. Im chukotai tishmeru, chukotai ta'asu. The telechu is not exactly the right word. So if that is the word, then it must have a meaning that we need to sort of pause and consider. So we have this idea specifically where the Torah is using a word about walking. And why walking? So I want to share with you a Chidushei Harim Rav Yitzchak Meir, the first Hebrew Rebbe. But in order to do that, I want to read a midrash. It's a midrash that David HaMelech, as it were, it's attributed to David HaMelech. I'll read this in Hebrew and translate. Hadahu dichtiv. This is what is meant by a pasuk. Chashavti darki va'ashiva ragli el edotecha. I thought about the path that I was going to follow, and my legs took me to your statutes. Amar David. David HaMelech said the following. V'chol yom v'yom hayiti mechashev lamakom ploni. Every day I would consider which place I was going to go to. I would decide myself, I'm going to this spot, I'm going to that apartment, I'm going to that place. But look, every day when I decided to go to this apartment, that place, it ended up that my legs took me to the Beit Knesset and to the Beit Midrash. So what's David HaMelech trying to say in this little midrash? And he's obviously making a point of using the walking as a metaphor. I was planning to walk here, I was planning to go here, but look what happened. This was in my mind, but I ended up somehow walking and going in that direction towards this destination, unbeknown, or not even because I made a conscious decision, but that's just how it ended up, maybe for my subconscious. So the Chidushei Harim, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir, says that every person is created with a specific tafkid in mind. We're all born. Why did Hashem create us? Hashem created us because he believed that each of us has some purpose in this world. We have a purpose. We have something we need to accomplish that no one else can. So I've been given a purpose that Hashem says I need to fill in this world, and so each of you have. And that's why you're here, because if you think, oh, I don't have to do this, somebody else will. Hashem is saying, no, I created you because the job I want you to do is something specific and peculiar just to you, and nobody else can do it. But even so, says the Chidushei Harim, everybody has to somehow understand their role and their place as it fits into the general community, to the collective of the Jewish people. Because sometimes I need to put aside something that's specific to me in order for me to understand my tafkid, my role that applies to the whole community. I have a personal tafkid, but I'm also part of a larger picture. I'm part of God's brushstrokes on the canvas, but there's a canvas. There's a bigger picture. I occupy a place on the canvas. It's true. That's me. That's my specificity. But I'm not the only thing on the canvas. Without me, there's going to be a space on the canvas, and it'll look odd. It's incomplete. But there is a canvas beyond me. I'm not the only picture. I'm not the only drawing or figure on the canvas. And he quotes the Mishnah that all of us quote often from Pirkei Avot Hillel. I have to be for myself. It's me. I'm that picture on the canvas. But if all I am is me on the canvas, I don't see the whole picture, then what am I? I'm part of something way bigger than me. So what is my responsibility, says the Chidushei Harim? No other person can do what I can do. But if I think that it's just me, I'm not going to be able to do anything. And that's what David HaMelech said. That's what he meant when he gave in that midrash, when he said, every day I had in mind I was going to go to this place or go to that place. But why? For me. I thought that it was about me. I needed to do that which I thought was right for me, the right time, the right place, the right job. But what happened? What happened was my legs took me to where? The Beit Knesset. What's the Beit Knesset? Do you know what the word means? Well, Beit, everybody knows, home. The Knesset means assembly. But assembly of what? Of people. Of more than me. Of a community, of a gathering, of a collective. I thought that I needed to go to this place because of me. But it turns out that my legs took me to the place of assembly of whom? Of the entire Jewish people. And I think what the Chidushei HaRim is saying is that where we go in life needs to be guided by two poles. The pole of who you are as an individual, in Eina Mili Mili, also the pole of our community obligations. And that's why Behar-Bechukotai Telechu, according to the Chidushei HaRim in a more homiletic, midrashic way, tries to explain why that verb telechu is used specifically. Okay. I want to share a really beautiful idea that Rav Soloveitchik is quoted as teaching in the collection called Humash Masoret Rav. Rav did not write a commentary to the Torah, but his beloved students gathered or collected the various things that he said for the many, many years that he gave Shiurim, both private and public, and things that he quoted that he connected to the Psukim, they gathered, and then they organized them and published a collection of his thoughts that became, as it were, a perush on the Chumash. So towards the end of the Parsha on Perek Chav Zayin, 27:19. I'll read the pasuk in Hebrew then English. Ve'im ga'ol yigal et hasadeh hamakdish oto ve'asaf chamishit kesef erkecha Allah v'kamlo. If the one who consecrated it redeems the field, we're talking about fields. Remember, we talked about fields that get sold and then they can be bought back. It's called redeem. So if I have a piece of property that's part of my family estate, it's part of my family estate, but I have to sell it. I'm in need of money. I'm leaving cash. I'm making a wedding, whatever it is. So a relative can say, you know what? I will redeem the land. I will pay for the land in order to make sure that the land remains within the confines of our family. So one more time. If the one who consecrated redeems the field, he shall add to it a fifth of the valuation money, and it shall be his. And here, Rav Soloveitchik offers what I think is a really, really fascinating idea that deserves to be considered. Start with his question. The entire world is consecrated to the King of the universe. How then is it possible for man to derive benefit from the world? The Torah here teaches us that it's possible to benefit from consecrated items through their redemption. So God owns the world. Everything in the world belongs to God. And somehow, in an inexplicable way, God's giving us opportunity to use his world. So how does he do that? He creates an opportunity, a system, a methodology. It's called redemption, which means what? We give something to God and he says, okay, I'm letting you use it. I mean, the master of all masters, the king of all kings, is allowing a puny, finite creation to somehow extract from God permission. And that extraction, that system is called redemption, where I give something of value. And Shmuel in the Gemara offers means that we can use to make this redemption, this transaction possible. And here's what he says. Fascinating idea. The Rav says that there are three ways that we can do this, and each one has a specific concept behind it. And I'm just going to try to find the On a hot day, one enters his home and tired and thirsty. His only desire is to gulp a refreshing cold drink. Yet, in contrast to the vulgar response of Asaph, who under similar circumstance sold his very birthright for immediate gratification, man withdraws from the object of his desire for one moment. I'm thirsty, it's cold, and I just don't pour it down my throat. I do something first. I say a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, as if to say, I'm not going to drink this before I recite my bracha. I will contract myself. I'll step back and withdraw from the immediate fulfillment of my desire. And through this act of momentary withdrawal, I remove the holy status of this glass of water and redeem it. I need to have Hashem agree that the water He created in the world I can drink. And so, what do I do to ask God's permission? I make a bracha, and that bracha is God's. You say the bracha, I'm giving you the water that I created. It's okay. But say the bracha first, which means I'm thirsty, but I have to take a step back and ask God, here's how I'm doing it. So similarly, when a Jew closes his place of business a half an hour before sunset on Friday, he redeems his profits from the other 6 days' labor. Hashem said, okay, I'm going to give you parnasa. But in order for me to give you parnasa, what you need to do is you need to take a step back. What's that step back? It's called Shabbos. Taking that step back, the contraction, redemption, permeates all aspects of halacha. So contraction, that stepping back, which, by the way, is what we talked about at the beginning of the Shiur, remember, for Hod. Number two, the second piece of this whole idea of how it's possible for a human being to benefit from the glorious world that God created, in which He essentially is the ultimate owner. The second attribute of God that we must imitate in order to redeem our worldly life is known as Hester, the attribute of obscurity. The master of the universe not only contracts himself, he obscures himself. He conceals himself behind a closed door. His actions are hidden. And he gives an interesting example. He says, so much of what you and I do as part of our daily ritual of Jews was decided by whom? They're called Anshe Knesset Havdalah, the men of the Great Assembly, 120 men. And we only know the names of 5 or 6 of them. There's 120. What happened to the other 94? Where are they? We don't know. Why not? Because it's not always so important for everybody to know my name. Obscurity. Sometimes we do work in obscurity. Sometimes that's one of the ways in which we ask God to give us part of His world. Just like there are things in this world that are hidden from us, from God, so too there are things that we ought to consider in terms of hiding, humility. Although the desire to bequeath a lasting legacy is compelling, the Torah calls for obscurity because of the Hester imperative. This requirement that God exacts is indeed formidable, yet ultimately there will be no permanent legacy in this world for man, only in the world to come. That's a tough one. And the last one I'm going to conclude the share with this. The third sacrifice, the third act that we engage in order to have God tell us, you may use my world, is a person must pay. The third thing that a person must pay in order to make use of the world is that of voicelessness, mute, passive acceptance. Although God occasionally reveals himself in a dramatic fashion, more often he is mute and passive. This tendency is reflected in his attribute of erech apayim, slowness to anger. Despite the actions of man that should provoke an angry response, God is long-suffering with silent acceptance of our foibles. Unanswerable, unexplained tragedies have accompanied the Jew in his long journey. A Jew must accustom himself to the idea that not all questions have answers. Often when a difficult question is posed in the Gemara, the response is teku. The answer is unknown. The Gemara's teku should reflect the teku within every individual. A Jew regularly recites a blessing upon eating and satisfying his hunger. All is well, he's healthy, and he's in possession of his faculties. Here, one can readily sense the presence of God. In cruel contrast, upon the tragic death of a mother, father, son, daughter, or spouse, as he rends clothing at the moment of greatest grief, a Jew recites a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam dayan ha'emet. Emotional sublimation is the greatest act of redemption that a Jew can pay the Holy One. There are times that silence is the only answer to give, but that silence is what, according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, is what Hashem says, that silence is so precious to me that silence is so valuable to me. It's what I accept from you as a way of redeeming all the things in the world, especially in light of the hardships. So Parshat Bechukotai has many descriptions of hardships. We didn't talk about them. They're the klalot, the curses that God forbid befall the Jewish people. And there are a lot, aren't there? And we read about them historically, but they're happening in our lifetime. And I haven't bought the book yet nor read it, but Rachel Goldberg Poland just put out a book. I've heard that it's quite a powerful read when we meet again. Maybe some of you have already read it, but it reminds us of this idea, I think, that the Rabbi is talking about, that our lives, that our place in the world is contextual. God is always there. It's his world that he created and we live in it. And to benefit from it, to live our lives in the most humane way possible, we need to understand what has to be done in order for us to feel that. And the Rav suggests that we need to seek permission, and that's these three things that he talked about. Not easy ideas. Clearly, the Rav is an existential Orthodox philosopher, wrote many works, some of which honestly are hard to get through. They're dense, they're philosophical. But sometimes he touches a nerve, I think, at least within me, that speaks to me as, yes, that's an idea that I can understand. That sometimes our pain, as searing as it is a way in which we find our place in the world. That's what I think Rachel Goldberg poem may be suggesting in the book. And maybe at some point in the future, if somebody reads it, I'd love to have a conversation with the group about that. So I'm going to stop here for tonight. Thank you all for your attention, your participation, which means so much to me. And I'd be happy if you guys want to unmute and excuse me, and share some of your thoughts with the group. I know the first idea that I spoke about Leg Balmer took a long time, but I just felt it was a worthwhile idea. Because I think few of us really spend time thinking about what Leg Balmer is about, and I just wanted to share what I thought is interesting insight.
There was a lot that you covered, but one interesting thing that comes to my mind is that this idea of the ownership of the land has continued to this day, in that, they have these like 50-year or 100-year leases, especially I know they have like the condominium complexes that are built on native land, for example.
Right. Will they ever be returned to the native people?
Well, 100 years is a long time for most buildings to stand, so it's hard to say. But I just thought it's interesting that that we've kind of, we often hear about Judeo-Christian values and standards, and it's not something that you think about every day.
No, that's true. Thank you for that comment. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I want to wish everybody a week of bracha. We should hear about peace in the Middle East, not wars, not missiles, and that we all should enjoy the ability to travel to our beautiful country as frequently and often as we want, directly near Hashem, and to enjoy the beauty of Eretz Yisrael with Am Yisrael and learning Torah Yisrael all at the same time. Wishing all of you a wonderful week and look forward to seeing you, God willing, next Tuesday night for the beginning of Sefer B'Midbar. So if you want, after you get off the Zoom with me, go take a glass of l'chaim and say, thank you, Hashem, for giving us the opportunity to finish Sefer Vayikra. So l'chaim, everybody. Siman tov u'mazel tov yehei lanu. L'chol Yisrael. Good night.
Amen.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night.